This is my 2022 Noli Chilcotin, and this is the bike I've been riding all year, as you probably know. But a lot of you have a very keen eye for bikes, and you've noticed that I've changed quite a few things. And a lot of you have been asking in the comments, why have I done that? What have I changed? What's going on? So I thought I would go through the bike today, tell you what I've changed, tell you what I've learned about which things I'm liking, which things I'm not, and maybe what I'll do for next year. So let's do just that. All right, so just a quick reminder, the frame that I'm riding is the 2022 Noli Chilcotin in the 167 configuration, and the 167 refers to how much millimeters of rear travel that is. I like a big bike, and I decided to stick with the long travel version throughout the whole year. And I'm happy to say that I don't really have any update for you on the frame. A few people saw sort of the stuff I was riding when I first got it. I was excited to jump off all the things and ride all the best fun trails that are pretty rough. And luckily, here it is. The frame is still chugging along just fine, so no updates there. But I do have one update right here, which a lot of you noticed very quickly when I put it on, and so let's talk about that. As you may remember, my bike came with a Super Deluxe Air, but right here I have a Super Deluxe coil. Now I borrowed this coil from Noli quite a few months ago, and I'm sure they probably want it back, but I've really been enjoying the coil. Once I tried it, I was pretty much sold. Now there are a lot of things that I like about it, but I don't think the coil is for everyone. This bike actually felt really great with the air shock, but I was just noticing what I wanted was that really super supple feeling, which this bike already is, that really soft rear end, you know, going through the travel pretty easily. But I wanted even more of that. And of course, what do you do then? You try out a coil shock. So I will say this coil on this bike gets the job done. When you're going through a lot of really rough sections, or you're just romping around in lots of holes and things like that, I think the coil just feels great. It's a hard feeling to describe, but there's something about when you're riding and you're going through all the stuff and the suspension is just feeling really good. I'm sure a lot of you know what I'm talking about, but I don't know how else to describe it. It just feels right, and it just feels like you can tell the suspension is working nicely, sort of the way that you want it to. And that's the feeling I get with this coil now. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to everyone because it does remove sort of that poppiness to the bike. And more specifically, one area where I can definitely notice it is if I'm riding in the bike park, it's those big, fast, steep, lippy jumps where you then are compressing more quickly into the travel and you're doing the exact opposite of what you want to do in a jump. I mean, you run the coil so that it's more supple and the suspension does its job better, but then it does its job perhaps too well when you're riding a jump, because ideally when you're riding a jump, I like jumping BMXs with no suspension, right? So this is supposed to keep you on the ground, but sometimes you want to go up in the air. So one area where the coil isn't as good, it's actually worse, is when you're jumping or you want to be really poppy or things like that. It's going to move through the travel and try to keep you on the ground a little bit more. Now, it's not a huge difference. Obviously, I run the coil and I still love jumping and probably jump, I think, just as well. But it just is a little bit harder. You just have to be a little bit more mindful. The other downside to the coil, of course, is that it weighs quite a bit more. I've never actually bothered to weigh them, but I'm a pretty heavy guy, and so these sort of few grams here and there don't really matter to me. I think maybe someone who's half my size might make a bigger deal, but for me, yeah, I can run coil or air or whatever. When it comes to weight, yeah, I'm too heavy to care. But the final upside to the coil that I really like is I think it just looks a lot cooler. There's something about a coil shock on a bike, especially something like the Noli. I think it just looks meaner, like it's gonna be super aggressive on the trail or something like that. Yeah, let me know if you agree, but I actually like the aesthetic of a coil shock quite a bit better. And yeah, so I think on my next bike, yeah, I'd like to keep the coil shock. Now there's two things that I've changed here, and one of them gets a ton of questions, and not even questions, just mean comments about my poor bike. And it's that these cables are super long and they're dangly and they flap around all over the place. But I also have my front hose going through the steer tube. And I'm surprised that a lot of people don't actually know why I'm doing this. So the reason that I have all my cables extra long and the front cable going through the steer tube is so that I can spin the bars around and do bar spins on my enduro bike. Hopefully I have a clip that I can insert of me doing one right here. Now, admittedly, on a 29er, a big one like this, bar spins are way harder than they are on my BMX. But they're still fun to try and do, and I'd like to do more, and hopefully you'll see more clips of me doing them. But the downside of that is the cables, of course, they're not very well attached and they're way longer, so they do flap around a lot more. And of course you can see them when I'm riding in the POV, the GoPro. The cables take up a lot of space. But they're long for a reason. I know they're not the best looking the way they are, but it's worth it for the bar spins. And of course, another thing you probably noticed that I've changed here is I'm not running the 35mm Trail 1 bars anymore. I have a 20mm Rise 1-Up bar. And that's because when I was riding the 35mm Rise bar, I was just feeling like maybe the bars were just always a little too high. Usually on bikes, I like a 35mm Rise bar. And on my previous bikes, I've thought that felt good. So I tried it when I built up this bike. But I started off with the stem and the bars really high, sort of how I imagined I'd like them. But throughout the summer, I just kept lowering them more and more and more. And now finally I put on 20mm Rise bars. And I think I've actually found the bar height and everything, the setup that I like now. So yeah, I've changed out my 35mm Rise bars for 20mm Rise bars. But there's more things I've changed down in my drivetrain. Let's take a look. Now here's a couple parts which I think are my most interesting changes. My cranks and my pedals are both made by a new brand out there known as 5dev, and they're great. And not only are they great, they look really cool. And if there's one thing that sells me on bike stuff, it's looking cool. I'm a total sucker for bike stuff that just looks cool. That's almost like the thing that matters most for me. But besides that, they also work really well, which that's the dream. So let's start with the cranks. These are 165mm in length, but one of the most interesting things about 5dev is not only the fact that they have these crazy holes right here, which I think again just looks so cool, is that they make crazy short crank lengths. I for sure have seen them offering 150mm lengths now. I think they might have even shorter than that. I think they've made test cranks that were even shorter than that. They're just going all out, trying all sorts of crazy things. So another really interesting thing about the cranks is that when you get these shorter cranks, they are actually shorter. They've designed them so that this piece right here only comes out a little bit past where the pedal goes, and that's not something you see from other crank manufacturers. Usually they're just as long as the long cranks. They just sort of move where the pedal inserts into the crank. But here, it's actually shorter, and so you should actually have fewer pedal strikes. And of course, maybe I should briefly just talk about the holes in the cranks here. I think maybe on first sight, a lot of people see that and they think, oh geez, you know, they're gonna be really easy to break or bend or whatever or anything like that. But I've been running these cranks all summer. I'm a really heavy guy and I've jumped things to flat pretty often on this bike, and they are still chugging away, going strong. I really like these cranks and I think they look great. I think they're a fun upgrade to any bike. I was also lucky enough to have 5dev send me a couple sets of their pedals, and yeah, I really like these pedals. As long as they work, that they're grippy. The other thing that is really important to me is that they look good, and these 5dev pedals look great. And not only that, I think they're actually quite a bit lighter than most other pedals out there. They're quite thin, and other than that, yeah, they're pedals. They grip really well, they look good, and you can get them in tons of cool colors. So yeah, that's another change I've made to the bike, and I've been running these 5dev pedals for quite a while now. Now this is probably one of the hardest changes to see, but I changed, not the seat, but the seat post. I think my bike came with a Trans-X post or something like that. It was a 170mm post, but I decided to put in a 210mm 1-Up post because the Nollies have a straight C-tube here and you can just run massive C-posts. Now, although I like how out of the way the seat gets, I actually think I'm gonna run less drop on my next bike. Because although it is nice to have the seat out of the way, it makes one thing much, much harder. And that's if I actually want to pinch the seat to hold on to the bike. So because I like to do tricks and I've been working on my suicide no-handers, I'm actually gonna run a 170mm dropper on my next bike. At 170mm, the seat gets out of the way just fine. And although at 210 it gets out of the way even more, I think it's worth it to have a slightly less drop so I can do tricks. The last big change I made to my bike has actually come full circle. When I set my bike up for bar spins, I thought it would be nice to have fewer cables, so I tried the GX Axis derailleur, which is wireless, of course, and it doesn't have this cable here going around, flapping around in the front there. And I did really like that derailleur, but it had just one fatal flaw, which I really just couldn't get over. And it's that it's just so much louder than even the regular GX, which is already not that quiet. And that's actually partially why I'm running the SDFU here. I thought maybe something was going on and there was more chain slap for some reason because I was running the Axis. But after looking at all this bike is actually quite quiet. I don't think the chain slap on this bike is really loud, or it's actually quite quiet. The noise was coming from underneath. And so part of the problem is the GX derailleurs, of course, a lot of you know, the clutch just isn't as strong as the Shimano derailleurs, which can be fine. These are really robust derailleurs. They're really good. A lot of people prefer them for that reason. But I really like how quiet the Shimano derailleurs are because they have that really tight clutch. Now on the GX Axis, they've said it's the same clutch, but I think the whole derailleur actually also shifts up and clunks against the derailleur hanger. Some people have told me it's because there isn't a cable here sort of pushing the derailleur against the derailleur hanger. And so every time you were hitting large bumps, it was going thunk, 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 thunking around. And if you watch my videos, like of the race in the EWS in Whistler, you can hear the derailleur just going crazy. It's so loud, and when you're riding, it's super noticeable because you can feel the thunk, thunk, thunk coming all the way up through the bike. So I've gotten rid of the GX Axis and I've gone back to just the regular GX. It's crazy how much quieter this is, and I much prefer this. And I think I could also get rid of the STFU on my bike. I don't think the chain slap is very loud. I think it was all coming sort of from the underneath here. So I don't really need this. I was trying it out. It does work really well if you do have a lot of chain slap, but luckily for me, I don't have that much chain slap. Now, it is really unfortunate about the GX Axis because I think it is such a solid product. I really like it, and I would like to have wireless shifting. I think all they need to do is figure out a way to quiet it down, and then also maybe what I do is make a bigger battery. I mean, it lasts for a long time, but it'd be nice if it lasted a little bit longer even. If they can just make it quieter and maybe make it last a little bit longer, I would 100% buy another one, because it was super nice to have a nice clean cockpit. I thought the shifting was great. I really liked it. But until then, I think it's cable actuation for me, which of course works totally fine. Probably more than that, it works great. So that's it. That's all the big changes I've made to my bike this year. And if you want to learn more about the other parts I'm running, I'll have my bike check linked somewhere, hopefully down in the description if I remember. But yeah, that's it. So if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments, or you want to know more about any of the parts, just let me know. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next one.